Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where you can be, belong, and become the very best version of yourselves. And so it is almost Christmas. Some of you, you're listening to it right now, and it might even be Christmas Day. So we just want to welcome you on this beautiful day where we're going to do a little bit of celebration. We're going to dig deep into the birth narrative. And so, but before we do, we want to remind you we've been moving through the book of Genesis. It's been so much fun. It's been so rich, so many good questions coming in over this book. And so, if you want to keep up with us over where we've been in Genesis, make sure to look at some of the past YouTube videos of where we've been, where we're heading. We're actually just starting chapter 8 together. Last week, we kind of delved in verses 1 through 6. And so, today, though, I'm going to start with a question over the birth. And so here's the question. Do you believe it's necessary to believe the birth story literally happened in order to enjoy it? And this is a really interesting question. Here's my answer. And again, this is me sharing an idea and thoughts. And we may disagree. We may find ourselves completely on the same page. Wherever we go, here's another idea. It's part of the conversation, right? It's what Jewish people call midrash. We give, we take, we discuss. It's part of the conversation. It's a conversation that continues to go on and on. As long as humanity is here, we will always have deeper and deeper conversations. We'll always have opportunity to bring something to the table. So, do I believe it's necessary to believe the birth story literally happened in order to enjoy it? I would say no. And here's why. I have many, many friends who range from atheist to humanist to Christian to post-Christian, they call themselves, to Jewish, Muslim, so many different friends from all these different belief and non-belief areas. And here's the thing. I know a person in almost every single one of those sectors, we can call them, who all have found appreciation for the story. And so for the secular person, this is a story filled with hope. It's a story. It's a story where the protagonists, right? They win despite all odds, right? The deck has been absolutely stacked against them, and yet this tiniest little baby is born in the worst of circumstances. Like, think about this in just a very general way right now in our culture, right? And we're born into certain environments, cultures, climates. We're born in certain ways, and yet that does not have to dictate how our life can be, right? So the Jesus story, really, there's a lot of beautiful places you can take this. I know from people who are deeply Christian, right? But they don't find this story to be literal anymore. They find it more symbolic. And yet for them even, this story is rich, 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 because they see in Jesus the story of Israel, not only Israel, but themselves. And so for them, they see this really rich application of how we too, the marginalized, the broken, the oppressed, can rise up and bring healing and restoration to the world. Beautiful, right? I also know many, many Jewish people who actually, even though they don't have the same connections as many Christians do over who the person of Jesus is, when they read through this narrative, though they find it more metaphor than literal, what they find in the story, they said they see the Jewish nation deeply in the story of Jesus. And so they see themselves much like they see Moses, Abraham, Adam, right? All of these different characters, Joseph, they see the same concept of a messianic archetype in the person of Jesus. And the messianic archetype is really a deeper metaphor for Israel. And so they see themselves in the middle of captivity. And yet, the beautiful thing about this is, even though born into the worst of circumstances, right? The Israelite nation was born poverty, broken, tiny, small, and yet they excel, they grow, and they grow not by essentially beastly empire, right? But kind, baby kind of like love, right? It starts with this newborn babe. It's a beautiful, beautiful metaphor for many of my Jewish friends. And so to answer that question again, I would say no, it doesn't have to be taken literally in order for it to still be beautiful, right? And so however you take the story, here's what I want to do today. I'm going to do something a little different. I'm just going to move through some of the elements of the birth story according to Matthew. And we'll have time later to look at Luke and other other elements of the birth story, but we're going to mainly look at the story from Matthew's perspective. And so, right from the get-go, what we always do at Ethos is we remind ourselves this is written by Jewish people, right? And so, again, meaning that this story is to understand the birth story, we have to remember that Jewish people wrote it. And so we have to understand what Jewish people think, why they write, who they write to, all of those different elements. And again, remember, this is in the first century, right? This is not written during Torah times when they're in Babylonian captivity, not written while they're in Egypt or whatever. They're under Roman rule, right? And so remember, the authors, again, they're writing this in the temple, right? And so for them, they're remembering the messianic archetypes, right, for the Jewish people. So when you think about an individual who has brought Israel out of captivity, right, in the middle of captivity and brokenness and pain, they're claiming the promise. God, you've said we're going to get through this. Spring will come again, right? Tikkun olam is going to happen again. Shalom, nothing missing, nothing broken. You've given us the promise. Where is it? That's when the messianic archetype arrives. And so what you'll find is Moses, right? The message is written, right? Moses and the Egyptians were told around campfire stories, right? During Babylonian exile. Moses becomes the hero while they're in Babylon, right? Daniel and the lion's den, right? A story about a guy in Babylonian captivity. They're not reading this while they're in Babylonian captivity, however. This is years and years later when they are under the Greco really under Greece, right? The Greek Empire. That's when they're reading that story. And again, their temple is also destroyed there, right? Antiochus Epiphanes, actually, he takes a pig, right? Sacrifices the pig on the Jewish altar, like one of the worst abominations one could think of doing to the Jewish people. He does that there. And the story that they're told to remind them that there is still hope in the middle of all the brokenness is Daniel in Babylon. And so isn't it interesting that 70 AD, after 70 AD, really, the death of Jesus is oftentimes said to have been around 27 AD-ish, right? So going further and further down, 70 AD, this is 40 plus years later, the temple is destroyed again. And this time it's by the Romans. And so what do? Well, they compile the stories again. And this time, it's not about Daniel in the lion's den. It's not about Moses in Egypt. It's about Jesus. It's about Jesus and the stories of Jesus. These moments where Jesus, how he chooses to respond to beastly empire, how he chooses to respond to injustice, right? This is how Israel sees themselves. They see themselves through Jesus now. Jesus is the new messianic archetype that will lead Israel into the promised land. That's the beauty. This is how a Jewish person would read this. And so the birth story of Jesus, again, is written after the temple. We see this here. They are inserting, what they're going to do is the Jews, these Jewish writers, they have Torah open. They have the stories open as they are writing about Jesus. And so what you'll see over and over again is they will bring up different, it's kind of like little clues, right? They'll say, hey, Jesus has a staff here and he's going to part the waters, but actually he's not going to have a staff, but he will be in the middle and the waters won't be here. They'll actually be above you'll see all these different connections to Torah back to their old stories. Because again, Jesus is the next Moses. He's the next messianic archetype for them. This is what Israel's called to be. And so in the birth story, you're going to find over and over again all these little references back. It's not looking forward, it's referencing back. Now, you can take that literally or metaphorically, however you want to, right? That's the beauty of this. And I know many of our viewers, it's one or the other, sometimes both, right? So let me share with you Matthew's perspective. Matthew's gospel, it starts with name dropping. He starts by saying this person and this person and this person, because that's what a Jewish writer would do. They want to legitimize the story, right? They want to share with you, this is the genealogy, right? This is where Jesus came from. This is why it's important. Is it literal or not? Well, I don't know if Mary, if she was a actual, if she was literally royalty, would she be in the place she is in the story? There are questions that pop up, of course, right? Either way, this is how Matthew chooses to start. And so Matthew will begin the story and he'll say this: after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews?" Now, this is so important to understand. If you are a Jewish person and you hear the name Bethlehem, Bethlehem has a rich, rich history in the Jewish history, their tradition, right? Bethlehem. Because here's the thing: Israel's famous king, their favorite king, was born in Bethlehem. Their favorite king, who coincidentally brings Israel out of captivity, right, from the bullies, their captors, these Philistines, brings them up and basically escalates them, puts them at a place where they are high. They are experiencing tikkun olam, right? Israel is on top again. David, the mighty warrior king, right? And so Bethlehem, Jesus coming from Bethlehem, you can immediately see the connections now. There's a reason, whether it was literal or not, they put Bethlehem there, right? They write it in there to show you the direct connection between David and Jesus. Jesus is going to be the next one to lead Israel into a deeper way of life. He's going to bring them out of captivity. That's why Bethlehem is brought up here. Now, notice this too. It talks about a star. We saw his star when it rose, and I have come to worship him. That's what the Magi say here. Now, again, many of us in our nativity scenes and all of this, we put the star up. It's a beautiful star. There are actually a bunch of documentaries about was there really a star or not? All of this, right? Was there a star that kind of magically like went here and then kind of and ended up over here? I wasn't there, right? I can't tell you if it did or didn't. All I can tell you is, again, as a Jewish person reading this, when you hear again the star, and you've already heard Bethlehem, you've made the connection to David, you immediately remember the Star of David, right? Over this house, over this place is going to be the next one that's going to lead Israel out of captivity into freedom. The Messiah has come, and he's right there. The Star of David over him. It's like the seal. It's saying, hey, this guy's legit. He's got the Star of David. Jewish readers, again, they made the connection, and it's really pretty cool, pretty profound. Notice this. There are magi, right? The magi, the wise men. And really, these are the people who come from, they're basically the foreigners, right? They come from outside of Jewish community, and they come in. And so notice this. Then Herod called the magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report him to me, so that I too may go and worship him." That Herod, right? That Herod, he's just trying to find out where they are. And so these wise men, though, the idea here of foreigners bringing gifts, this again is not a new idea. If you're a Jewish person, you've made the connection to Bethlehem, you made the connection to the star, you see David, you get the picture, David's showing up already in your mind. Now you have these foreigners coming and bearing gifts. Now again, you know the stories, you've been reciting these stories, memorizing them, and at 12 years old, you are sharing, you're basically repeating Torah, you know the stories. And so these people immediately, you're going to make the connection as a Jewish person. Isaiah 60, verse 3, nations will come to your light. And again, this is not about Jesus, by the way. This could be connected in references to what Jesus is now, right? But this was a reference, this was a metaphor of Israel. That's what Isaiah was speaking to. He was speaking to his people. He said, someday we will become the great nation again. And he says, nations will come to your light, Israel, and kings to the brightness of your rising, Israel. They immediately, this is a promise that they had. They recited this often because the hope, the promise was at some point their people would experience great again, right? They would be at this place again where they are on top. Tikkun olam, nothing missing, nothing broken, right? Everything's in reorder again. And they held on to that promise. And so this idea of nations, foreigners coming and basking in the light of Israel was not new. And when they read this again, you can imagine the writers looking at Isaiah and saying, "Oh yeah, that's good. Let's add that." And notice this even continuing on with Isaiah 60. Lift up your eyes around and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons will come from afar, and your daughters will be carried in your arms. Again, you're seeing the connections here. Isaiah 60. This is a favorite verse and chapter for the Israelites. It's a promise. And now notice this though, verses 5-6. The wealth of the nations will come to you, so the nations will bring gifts. Yeah, as a Jewish person, you made the connection. This is so obvious to you, right? As you're reading the story of the birth, you are making the connections that the writers want you to make. A multitude. Where did the camels come from? Well, here they are, right? A multitude of camels will cover you. There the camels are. The young camels of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba shows up, right? Will come. They will bring gold and frankincense and bear the good news of the praises of the Lord. Where's the myrrh? Well, 1 Kings 10, 1-13, you're going to find the Queen of Sheba shows up. She gives gifts to David. Again, David's already shown up in the story. Frankincense, gold, myrrh. You guys see the connections here. The writers are borrowing, using these different concepts to bring in the idea Jesus' birth was a really important moment, right? The birth of this new messianic person that's going to bring Israel into a new way of life. And they're borrowing from the old, and you as a Jewish person make the connection immediately. It's really rather beautiful. Now, here's something that I want you to notice. Herod was the king at that time, right? And made reference to this, right? Herod's the king, right? The Israelite king, at least. He's more of a puppet king in Rome, but he is the Jewish king. And what's fascinating about this is not only did emperors have virgin birth stories, Herod, when you study historically Herod, he believed that he was born from a virgin. Interesting, right? Virgin born. Because anytime in Roman culture, if you were born of a virgin, that meant the gods had interacted with your mother, right? And now a demigod is born. And the demigods were going to bring heroic acts. They were going to do certain things, and they were going to help mankind, right? And so Herod had this story that he was the king. He was the one they've been waiting for. He was the Messiah. He was born a virgin, right? And so this was Herod. He was going to usher in this new freedom for Israel. But however, here's the thing about Herod. Herod was going to usher it in through assimilation. Herod was going to make Israel great again, right? By assimilating to the Roman ways. He was going to make Israelite more Roman. That was the way that he foresaw Israel becoming great again. But Jesus is very different. The story of Jesus is not one of Herod. Though most of us would say, yeah, Herod should be king, right? However, that's not how it goes for the Jewish people. They're looking for a different messianic person, right? They're looking for a different Messiah. And so notice this, right? Even though everyone else says, yes, Herod should be king. He's great. He's a warrior. He's done all these things. Here's the message we're reminded of, right? Again, we're reminded of David. And so we're reminded, even though there is a king on the throne, in the moment when Saul is still king in the story of David, right? Even though he's still king, something happens, right? David is anointed king, even though there's a king still on the throne. Notice this. Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I've rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I send you to Jesse, of course, the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons. Right? And of course, he's going to be the youngest, the smallest. He's going to come from a place he's a shepherd, right? He's the lowest of the low. Again, no wonder the shepherds show up in the Luke story, right? All of these connections that they're making to the Old Testament. When they entered, he looked at Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed one is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature. We don't need another Herod, God is saying, right? Because I've rejected that. I've rejected power struggles. I've rejected militantism. I've rejected those things. Israel needs something different. We don't need another lion. We need a lamb. And that's where David is chosen. That's beautiful. And that's where, again, the Jesus story comes in. We don't need another lion, and we need a lamb, right? The Jesus story is a beautiful reminder to us in so many different ways, right? I know that we're all about the gifts. We're all about the Christmas lights, the trees, all of those things, but there is such a deeper, deeper message here. The Christmas gospel, I would argue in Matthew, it shares a plethora of them, right? But there's two really beautiful themes I find that I would beg you to consider right now during these Christmas days, whatever day you decide to celebrate Christmas on. Some of you, it's going to be the Saturday, Sunday, whatever. Two really beautiful ideas here that come from Matthew. One of them is this: what we value defines us. What we value defines us. Think about that one for a moment. Because during the Christmas holiday, what is it that you value most? Ask yourself that. What is it that I value most? Gifts, shopping, material things, or the deep connection you have with the divine, with the people around you, family? What is it you value most? Because for Israel, it was no longer the Herod mentality, was it? We don't need to be a great nation on top, destroying other nations, all this. We need to be a nation that connects together. We hold together, right? We come together. We seek peace, life more abundantly. That's what Israel was choosing to value. And Jesus fit that mold perfectly of what Israel wanted to become. Yeah. And then the other part is this: hope. The Matthew story of the birth, it offers us hope. It offers us hope. We have gone through a ridiculously, historically, incredibly bad year, right? 2020, I don't know how it could have been worse. But here's the beautiful message of the birth story, is that even in the middle of all the brokenness, in the middle of all of the chaos, in the middle of all of the captivity, in the middle of all of that, there's hope. There is new life springing up just around the corner. And the Jesus narrative reminds us that sometimes it comes in the most unexpected places. But the story is a story that we've heard before. The story is one that we can connect with because we all understand that there's hope, spring. There is a remedy to the brokenness and the pain. And it's right there. Yeah. So good. I hope that during this time, you might pick up Matthew and you might read that birth narrative through again too. Take time and just enjoy it. Maybe put yourself in the place of a Jewish person reading it, right? You're in the middle of brokenness. Your temple's been destroyed. You are looking for hope. And you read about Jesus. You read about this miraculous birth that shouldn't have happened, right? All the deck was stacked against him. And yet, life found a way to spring up. The divine brings the gifts, the beauty. It's all there. It is a beautiful, beautiful story. I hope you read it. Read the Gospel of Matthew. And if you have time, look at Luke as well. Yeah. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. This was fun. Put on your ugly sweaters and follow along with me. As always, please consider donating. Go to www.ethos-church.org/donate. Please give that donation there, the tax-deductible donation. It's the end of the year. It's super, super helpful for us to be able to continue doing what we do every week. And our Ethos living room sessions, these are so much fun. We got together. We talked about the birth story. We talked about the beauty of it, how to apply it today. So good. That's what we do there. We do the podcasts, we do blogs, we do all of it. It's so much fun. And as always, please consider clicking subscribe, share these videos with people. We love y'all. Thank you so much for joining us at Ethos Church. Everyone take care, and we'll see you next week as we continue to delve into chapter 8 of Genesis. See ya.